Hello everybody and welcome to Michal's Cafe Clinic number 8. Thank you so much for joining today. Today I'm going to talk about life as an international student. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michal. I'm an MBA student and an international student from Israel. I have lived in America for 6 years now and created some, assumptions, been shocked a few times by different culture shocks and food shocks and language barriers. And I survived to tell you all about it. So, I feel like learning about different cultures, first of all, is really interesting to me. But second, it is very important because if you are able to distinguish the fact that people are coming from different experiences, different point of view, different biases, you can better understand why they're acting in a certain way and why sometimes you can come across with them in different conflicts. As an undergrad, I did my undergraduate at Eastern Michigan University, and then I continued for an MBA at Stony Brook University. And ever since I came in 2015, I felt like I was put into this box of like everything I say, everything I do, the way that I behave is being put on everybody in Israel. And so I was like the sole representative of an entire country to people that don't know Israel or don't know who Israelis are and how we behave. And that was like a stressful position to be. And it took me some time, but I realized that the best thing that I can do is to be my best self. And so take note of the fact that some people that I'm going to talk to would talk to an Israeli for the very first time, and their perception of me, hopefully positive, but it can be negative, will impact their perception of everybody in Israel. So with that being said, everything that I'm going to be sharing today and all of the things that I'm going to talk about today are obviously information and data. I'm not making things up, but they're also drawn from my personal experience, and they're not necessarily everybody in Israel. I'm sure people in Israel will not always agree with me. So please keep that in mind. And now we will dive in to the point of today's presentation. If you have any questions, by the way, please feel free to let me know. So life as an international student. I asked my fiance earlier. My fiance is an American with an Israeli citizenship. What do you think is the biggest difference between Israelis and Americans? And he said, absolutely the way that Israelis communicate. So Israelis' communication is very, very direct, and it comes off as very blunt. Like we cut to the chase. We're not circling around. We're not sugarcoating things. We're not like faking being nice ever. It's like a waste of time. You just say what's on your mind. So over here in America, I've gotten into so much trouble because I'm always like speaking up and just saying it bluntly. I just say what I think. I don't try to insult anybody. Obviously, I'm not trying to be rude, but in many cases, because of the collapsing between the cultures, I come off as very rude. And my fiance said, Americans, when they communicate with somebody, they constantly think about the other person's emotions. How is this person going to perceive the message or whatever I'm going to say? And Israelis, they just say it. This week, actually, my fiance and I are looking at apartments, and we got an email from a realtor, and she's sending us pictures of apartments or whatever, and I saw that she misspelled my last name. So I'm writing back saying, hey, thank you so much. Just so you know, you misspelled my last name. It is spelled like this. And I'm getting a phone call from him, and I'm like, you don't have to be so rude about it. Like, she just made a mistake. Like, why did you have to like attack her about it? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't attack her. I was like very nice about it. I said, thank you so much. You just misspelled my last name. So it's like things like that that just sometimes catch me off guard. And then another thing that comes from the same communication style is being politically correct, which I'm not very good at. Here in America, there are certain issues that are so sensitive, and I know that they're very sensitive, but at the same time, because I'm very direct in my communication, and believe it or not, when I go back to Israel, I'm on like the spectrum of very not direct. Like I'm the nice one that doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But over here in America, I'm like so blunt and rude or whatever. So I'll give you a perfect example. Last week, clinic number 7 was I pitched an idea for the WISE directory. Hey, I really want to do a clinic about how to do your makeup for a job interview because I really like makeup and I'm really good at it, so I can totally teach somebody. And I came out response saying like, we don't want you to send the message that makeup is required for a job interview, or that you have to wear makeup as a woman, or that you are like feeding on the idea that it is the definition of femininity. And I'm like, I did not say that. I said, I'll teach you if you want to learn. I didn't say that it's required for job interviews. So it's things like that. It kind of like mixed with my head, but at the same time, there is a huge awareness to gender, for example, and you have to be politically correct about it in order to not hurt anybody's feelings. Because I do not want to hurt anybody's feelings, but at the same time, I feel like here in America, people are overly sensitive to certain issues, and I just find it very confusing. But then again, that comes from I grew up in a certain environment, and I grew up to be blunt and to not spend too much time going round and round. So I hope as I'm saying this, I hope I didn't hurt anybody's feelings, but I'm just explaining it the way that it is. Next thing that's on my mind with culture differences, and I cannot not talk about it, is the idea that government in Israel, for better or worse, very socially involved. And so healthcare, for example, it doesn't cost as much. And there are very, very high taxes, definitely very high taxes, but there are certain things in Israel that protecting the citizens from certain things. So for example, and it's really sad for me, I'm not going to talk about it for too long, but I see homeless people in America all the time. It is so sad for me. Like I see people brushing their teeth off in the street, or a person that is with a suitcase sitting on a bench, and it is very clear to me that that person picked up everything in his suitcase and left because he didn't have a choice. And I just feel like in America, you don't have to make really difficult, like really bad decisions to end up like that. But in a very like sociable, involved government, you really have to mess up a series of bad decisions that usually involve drugs and alcohol to end up on the street. Because I'll give you an example. I had a relative, she passed a couple of years ago. She came from Russia to Israel when she was 50 something years old. She didn't know the language. She didn't have any pension rights. And she was in that group of like, you need help. And so she received an apartment, like a very small apartment in a not very good neighborhood, very like, not like the greatest city, but she wasn't allowed to like pass that apartment to anybody else in her inheritance, but she had like a house. So that kind of thing really troubles me. And I wonder like what is better, because on the one hand, definitely as a person that is like me, I'm young, knock on wood, I'm healthy. And I know that like if I work hard, I'll be successful. Then I will have a lot of options here, and I have accessibility to many different things here in America that not necessarily in Israel I'll have the option to do. So in Israel, you don't have that freedom as much because taxes are crazy. Gas costs 3 times more in Israel than it is in America. And cars have 100% tax. So it costs double in Israel than it is here. Groceries are a lot more expensive. Things like that. So like you can't have the cake and eat it too. American expression. But it's one of those things that kind of like you see the both differences for me. And I wish there was some middle ground for it, but that's like, again, my bias and experience with it. Maternity leave. In Israel, when you have a baby, one of the 2 parents has the right to stay home for a year. I know that in America, it's 3 months. So, like I said, it's things like that. Another thing that's really different in Israeli culture, that is not so much in American culture is being very, very close to family. So Israel, as I said, is a tiny country. It's not a thing like, oh, I live in Los Angeles, California, and my parents live in, I don't know, Michigan, and it's 6 hours flight. The most you can drive is 6 hours in Israel. So usually you live within an hour away from everybody and your family members. So you see them a lot and they're very involved with your life. Sometimes they're very too much involved with your life, for better or worse, like I said. Also, because it's a small country, everybody know each other. So like everybody I meet, I feel like they would know somebody, or they grew up somewhere, or they worked or swam with somebody that maybe I know, because it's like a much smaller degree. That's also, I believe, why coronavirus hit them so hard, because the degrees of closeness was much smaller in Israel, and that's why people were together with their family more. So better and worse. But for example, I learned in America that it's like a huge taboo, but like when I had boyfriends back when I was younger, I would meet their family within 2 days, and they would meet my family within 2 days. And I know that here in America, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I would date a girl for a year before I would even think about meeting, like introducing her to my family. It's different within each family, but like I totally remember like dating somebody casually and meeting his mom, like on a dinner or something like that. Um, and then dating in Israel too is funny, because Israeli women are very hard to get. They tend to be very, very hard to get, like 30 times more than American women. And I say that based on my experience with college student American women. A lot harder to get, Israeli women. And so Israeli men are maybe 10 times more aggressive in their communication, not in a bad way, but like, hey, I really like you. What's your number? Like that, come up to you and try again and again. Not in I don't want to present it in a bad way, not in like a non-consensual way, but it's just the style of communication. So it's kind of like the egg and the chicken type situation, like what come first? Israeli women being really, really hard to get, so Israeli men had to be very aggressive, or Israeli men being so aggressive, so Israeli women had to be very like, no, 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 like hard to get. I don't know. There was also some sort of a food shock when I came to America. Um, I feel like it's not as healthy, and it's much bigger portions, and it's in a way very, very, very easy. So like it's not as common, and again, it comes to every family to create food from scratch. I remember seeing like a muffin mix for the first time in America. Like, what do you mean? Like, don't you need egg and flour and sugar and things like that? Like, no, you just have this mix, you add an egg, maybe some water, and you stick it in the oven. Or I remember having a soup mix for the first time. So it's those kind of things that like everything has to be very easy, and your money has to go a much long way. Like that's the emphasis on marketing here, I feel. There is no difference in cost of food between healthy food and unhealthy. So like there are obviously McDonald's in Israel, but like it's not a $5 meal. It's a $20 meal, the same as you will go for a healthier meal, I feel. So these are some of my observations. Please stop me if you have any questions.
I had a question. So in Israel, since like people follow like kosher, are there like the architectural like places of like the kitchen like specifically made so like there can be like the dairy side and the meat side?
Yes. So it all depends on how much of kosher you keep, but the very religious people, they will have separate sinks for dairy and for meat. They will have separate plates and silverware for dairy and for meat, and they will have different shelves for like you can never buy meat and dairy at the same section in the supermarket. Like so you'll have it separately. Also, very religious people have to wait 3 hours after dairy before you can eat meat, and 6 hours after meat before you eat dairy. I feel like that's one also reason why maybe people in Israel eat less, because they have to wait. My fiance, for example, he keeps kosher, but he will not wait 3 hours. He will wait like half an hour, something like that. And he will eat on the same plate a steak as well as cheesecake, like it's, if it's clean, obviously. But he doesn't go to that level of keeping kosher. But when I was in the military, for example, um, obviously the military has to cater to everybody. So it kept the highest standards of kosherness. And whenever we had like those chores in the kitchen, we had to, sanitize the the dairy silverware had a blue mark on it, and the meat silverware had a red mark on it. So things like that. I personally don't keep kosher. It's always fascinating to American to hear that, like, I had to go, for example, through basic training, where I learned how to shoot, for example, and for like 4 weeks or whatever, I learned everything about the military, and then so that's mandatory for everybody to do. And people like always ask me like, "Oh wow, so you learned how to shoot? That's like so incredible." But for me, it is very like basic. It is one of those things that you just go through as an Israeli. And by the way, I before I even held a gun, I learned the parts of the names. I learned how to clean it. I learned how to use it. I learned how to defend myself without it. I learned what are the steps and how to do it. And then, only then, I learned how to shoot it in a very safe place, obviously following all of these guidelines. And that was after I was diagnosed through tests to see that I'm mentally stable and things like that. So it is very cautious. You don't just, go to the supermarket. Not that I'm saying that it is like that here, but in some parts in America, it's very easy to get a gun. So a few of the things that I really appreciate about America, and I plan on living here for a few more years to work, is the fact that obviously the opportunities here are limitless. Like as I said, I'm a marketing major and I'm going into marketing. Hopefully, I am currently in school still, but the level and degree of the things that I can accomplish here, being 25 years old by the time I'm 30, are magnitude in comparison to my classmates from high school who are my age and are just now going and just now starting their degree and just now starting like a real job or whatever, something like that. And you have to remember too that I was 2 years older than everybody else in college because I had 2 years of military experience. So it's almost like putting 2 years of hold on your life from starting your real life. At the same time, it's also really helping you mature and become like a very like it makes you wiser, I feel. I love the sport here in America. It's the best, the best, the best, the best, and it's the number one reason that brought me here. So much respect for athletes, so much like attention and budget goes into athletics, and it's creating a very strong culture of like emphasizing on sport that is very healthy for you, and it is bringing people together and is creating like an amazing habits, I feel. The idea of being fake, which I mentioned before, is can come really in your benefit because, for example, I was in a swimming team with 30 girls. In Israel, this would never exist because they would hate each other, will never get along. But in America, we were so nice to each other. Oh my God, like I love you so much, like let's hang out, like all of that. When really you don't really like me and you don't really want to hang out with me, and that's totally fine. So in Israel, I wouldn't spend any time trying to get somebody to like me if I don't like her back. But here in America, because and I'm sorry I'm using fake, but it is kind of like you're supposed to be very, very nice, even if you don't like the person. We were, as a team, as a swimming team, we were so cohesive. We had such a strong team culture. We were so close together, like all the time. And it's allowing you to do that because we were not exposing necessarily how we really felt. I cannot thank you enough for coming in today and taking the time to listen to my experience and my culture. Thank you so much for attending this clinic today. I really hope that you enjoyed and learned something new. Thank you.